The Business of Biotech is produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biopharma decision makers. If you're working on biologics process development and manufacturing challenges, you need to swing by bioprocessonline.com. If you're trying to stay ahead of the cell or gene therapy curve, visit cellandgene.com. When it's time to map out your clinical course, let clinicalleader.com help. And if optimizing outsourcing decisions is what you're after, check out outsourcepharma.com. We're Life Science Connect, and we're here to help. Our friend and celebrated biopharma opinionator, Allan Shaw, says the last mile of the supply chain, the part that gets therapies to, and indeed into patients, is twisted and broken, that incentives work for all the wrong players, and that patients, physicians, pharmaceutical developers, payers, and virtually everyone except the PBMs are getting short shrift as a result. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and on today's show, Allan and I are back together to plane over the business of drug distribution, what's broken, how it might get fixed, and the signs on the not-too-distant horizon that tell us the time for reform just might be nigh. Allan, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Matt, and thanks for having me back. Always a pleasure to be with you.
It always is. I'm always happy to have you back, and I always look forward to these conversations. And this one is a little bit outside of the wheelhouse of where we usually dwell, but nonetheless important. I've had multiple conversations recently with biotechs that are in pre-commercialization mode. That means they're in pre-drug distribution mode. So this concept, this discussion that we're going to have about the way the drugs are distributed, who's rewarded, compliance to drugs and therapies and better outcomes, it's absolutely relevant to our audience, I think. And, you and I had a brief conversation about this a week or so ago, and I think there are some movements in play that might be cracking the door open to sort of change the paradigm. So I'm going to get your thoughts on that, but to sort of get a level set heading into the conversation, I'm curious if you can just expand for us a little bit at the high level on what you mean when you talk about this convoluted last mile of the pharmaceutical supply chain and how it works today and where you see broken links.
No, thanks, Matt. I would start off by, it's kind of like the elephant in the room. And, it's something that's fortunately, I think the elephant is starting to be noticed. Given the sheer magnitude of the financial stakes, it's not surprising a cottage industry was created, which feasts on the inefficiencies and a Byzantine relationships embedded in the opaque biopharma supply chain. With high gross to net margins, never been greater, almost 50% or higher, that neither benefit the patient or the innovative drug manufacturer. And it's estimated to be approximately, $250 billion on the table annually. And the middlemen, otherwise known as the PBMs, win. And they do this by extorting ever-increasing rebates and discounts in exchange for favorable formulary positions.
It's been this way for quite a while. Like, what are your thoughts on how long has sort of the model that we're looking at right now that we see as problematic been in play?
It has been a problem for a long time, and it continues to be a problem. As I like to quip, if you make a wrong turn and you keep going down the road, it's still a wrong turn.
Yeah.
And, I think it's time to get back on the road. And this is no different, with so much value being lost or redirected, particularly in a pricing environment that's being challenged by gravitational forces, reflecting the current system, which is apparently and increasingly unsustainable. Mm-hmm. This and actually, while this is all negative, it can actually, if you look at it through another lens, it can actually provide an opportunity for the industry to start rehabilitating its image. Instead of trying to raise drug prices, isn't it time to start exploring ways to extend the commercial supply chain to better engage with patients and advance commercial goals while squeezing out the vast waste of legacy business practices.
Yeah. Why do you think this is a good time to be having this conversation?
You know,
I mean, not that there's ever a bad time to have a conversation about things that aren't working right, right? But I sense that there are dynamics that make this a more timely conversation than perhaps it might have been a couple of years ago.
I think, we've been hit in the head so many times as an industry. I think people are starting to understand that we're not the only ones who should be getting hit in the head is one. Yeah. I think that the nature of the system being broken is increasingly evident with the graying population that we have, and you would think that, the industry continues to raise prices, right? It continues to raise prices at a pace that outpaces inflation, yeah, and that really underscores the industry being tone deaf. And right now, and I can get into it in a little bit, I can get into, what's happening. But in many cases, what's driving price increases are actually the PBMs themselves, who, because, what happens is you raise the price, but then you're also increasing the rebate. So, the net amount that's coming back to the manufacturer is pretty negligible.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing and expect a different outcome.
Yeah.
So I don't think the industry can continue raising prices like they have been. And it's also continuing to, fan the negative perception that we have. We're not helping ourselves by doing it either economically or from a public relations perspective. We lose. The industry's pricing headwinds are well known, particularly in the face of global cost and containment initiatives, tethered at really tethering the unsustainable nature of our system. And the aging demographics is only making this harder. And there's a need to change. You can point to a lot of things in this country where we continue to kick the can. I don't think it's necessarily sustainable. I don't think this one is either. Mm-hmm. So at some point, there's going to be a day of reckoning. And I think there's still an opportunity for the industry to control the narrative as opposed to having the narrative controlled for us.
Yeah. You talked about a lot of things in this country that are, in the throes of being kicked down the road. And it's almost, when we have this conversation, I almost cynically or tongue in cheek want to ask you, like, well, why not? Why not raise prices? I mean, you said we outpace the cost of inflation, that's really saying something given the inflationary period that we're in right now. But the American public, payers, seem to be begrudgingly dealing with rising costs of grocery prices, rising cost of consumer packaged goods. I mean, automobiles are off the chain right now. Real estate is out of control. Everything's getting more expensive. And I think to consumers anyway, to patients, as it were in this case, in all of those industries, there are gray areas where it's not understood exactly who's benefiting or who's getting rich on these price increases. So not unlike the pharmaceutical last mile supply chain. All of this expense that people and payers are burdened with is coming without apology. Yet we keep paying. Why? So why? And again, I asked the question sort of tongue in cheek. Why not drugs? Why shouldn't the people who are pulling the wool over our eyes in the pharmaceutical industry and making money on it continue to get away with it the way that everyone else is right now? That sounded very cynical, didn't it?
I think you're right on a lot of different levels. I think where the industry has to go on this, some of these things, because if you buy a car, right? It comes with a warranty. You know, if you go to the ATM machine and you don't get your money out, you have recourse.
Mm,
You know, if you fly on an airline and you have recourse. When you take our products, it either works or doesn't work. There's no recourse.
yeah.
So I think there should probably be more risk sharing as part of the answer too. I think there's things that can be done in terms of squeezing out costs on the supply chain, as we can touch on and go into the PBMs. But I also think that there's things that we can also further do on a risk sharing perspective. Whether you can do it with current modalities, or you can certainly, I think it lends itself very much so with some of the newer modalities, such as gene editing, when you're talking about sticker prices that are rather significant. So there's going to be some risk. There's going to be a need for the industry to risk share. You just can't sell pills without there being any accountability, or injections without it working. And the industry is going to move to that at some point. But I think there's a lot of inefficiencies, and I think the way we have historically operated, as I touched on, is really there's lax transparency. There's a lot of different folks involved, and it's why did the chicken cross the road? Because they did it last year. And it's just like night follows day.
Yeah. Yeah. You've called out the PBMs, not just because they contribute to excessive costs, but I've heard you call them out because, in your opinion, they contribute to poor patient compliance and thus poor health outcomes. So explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, for the benefit of all, pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, work on behalf of the health plans and employers by creating formularies or lists of medicines covered by insurance. It's important to highlight that PBMs were actually created with the objective of negotiating lower drug prices while enabling patient access to medicines. How do you think that's been working? Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out that way, as the PBMs have really lost their way. At issue is the convoluted and opaque nature of their relationships, which greatly affect the cost of medicines for hundreds of millions of Americans. Presently, PBMs use their market power to profit by keeping drug prices high, harming patients in biotech innovation. 3 PBMs, CVS, Express Scripts, and OptumRx, are integrated with pharmacy chains and insurers and control 80% of the prescription drug market. This dynamic is driven by the rebate game, which I'll further elaborate on. PBMs provide favorable placement on formularies, which are the lists of medicines covered by health insurances, in exchange for rebates they receive from drug makers, effectively pay to play. Drug makers argue that they must raise prices to compensate for these rebates, while pharmacy benefit managers maintain to drug companies raise prices to boost profits. In practice, this is not much different than a traditional retail shelf space for other consumer products, slotting fees paid by retail product manufacturers, whereby commercial success can hinge on consumer or patient access. Without formulary listing, over 95% of the drug purchases will go elsewhere. Because of the situation, rebates are a really big factor in the increase of drug prices.
Yeah. What's an alternative? I mean, this is one of those things where the deeper you dig, the more convoluted you see things are. And I think in some cases, when you're in a situation like that, it's more difficult to kind of claw your way out of it with a rational thought. I mean, so what is the alternative?
It's the $250 billion question. There's a lot of money at stake. And when you have that level of self-interest, it's going to be very hard to take the candy away from those who have it right now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, lobbying and self-interest groups. But, I think if we can focus on the patient and think about the patient, and should be all about the patient and the outcomes of the patient, I think it's easier to get to answers that make sense, and work towards that. Again, a lot of this is much easier said than done.
Yeah.
But from my experience, drug adherence is the common denominator for all stakeholders and should serve as the foundation of patient engagement strategy. As patient drug compliance is the biggest rate limiting factor in successful outcomes, implementing patient loyalty programs that correlate pricing discounts to drug adherence would provide a win-win strategy for redirecting middlemen or PBM profits back to consumers while driving down drug prices. Of course, as I said, this is much easier said than done.
Yeah.
But I think it's a start to, the more the patient takes a drug and stays compliant, the drug price comes down. So, you're correlating everyone's interests to successful outcomes. Somehow, that gets lost in translation.
So if in a transition to that model, I'm just curious about the economics of it. There's enough, I mean, in your, I guess, general perception, there's enough money padded or built in to allow that. Like, as you said, some of these new therapies come with an incredible sticker price. Adherence to that down the road, should some of the money that's going to PBMs in the form of rebates be reallocated, you think that the economy of that kind of downward scale works?
I think it's certainly, in theory, it drives alignment. I would think if you can drive down drug pricing and you drive it down by compliance, that should align.
Yeah.
The only person that's misaligned or dislocated would be the PBMs.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea here is to provide patient access. And if you can reduce the costs and provide access, I think that's a winning strategy for patients. As I mentioned, the drug prices go high, but, the gross to net discount is really the thing that sometimes gets lost in the headlines at the end of the day. And, what's the sticker price isn't necessarily certainly not realized by the manufacturer. It's really the difference between what the manufacturer gets and everybody in between.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, the compliance aspect and the health outcome aspect, obviously compliance benefits the pharmaceutical company, right? I mean, that if we're keeping them on the drug, we're selling more product. And if the health outcome as a result of that compliance is positive, which in theory it would be if you've built a good drug, you're also not only selling more product, but improving that perception of this industry that we've talked about on multiple occasions, and the absolute, we're bottom of the barrel. People like the government and airlines and lawyers more than they like us.
And it's sad that the only thing that Washington agree on is to hate the biopharma industry. There's no consensus anywhere, even in war. And it's only our industry that there's consensus across the aisles.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the federal government, what is like the bigger question is who is equipped to play a role in changing the paradigm? I'm assuming that would include, Congress, and for the point you just made about their disdain for this industry, at the very least, that disdain indicates an appetite for change. So the bigger question is who's involved in a change like this, and like I said, I'm assuming that the federal government plays a role in there somewhere.
It'd be great if there was a single throat to choke here. There's a lot of codependency. And unfortunately, reform is, as we touched on, is much easier said than done when considering the number of factors and stakeholders that make up our complicated and varied healthcare landscape. Just to show lack of alignment, here is just an illustration of one. For example, the PBMs put an emphasis on minimizing current period costs over healthcare system costs. So rather than treating somebody with a chronic issue or paying for something that would be useful, it's in their benefit to pay the more of the generic cost, lower, less innovative product in order just to minimize their cost today, even if it not realize hospitalization down the road.
Mm.
And that's really a huge systemic misalignment that focuses on short-term cost and profit as opposed to patient outcomes. So, where we kind of are, we can't get out of our own way. And, you really need to, I think, reorientate what the outcomes are and what we're trying to. And I think, as an industry, it's an opportunity for us to kind of change that paradigm a little bit, or try to at least try to control the narrative. I don't think we really have staked out a position other than focusing on the PBMs are better than focusing on us.
At some pharma companies, we're seeing, like, I think Lilly is toying with like a direct to consumer model. We see the likes of like Mark Cuban playing with this. We see Amazon getting in the pharmaceutical distribution business. To what degree do those moves that we see happening across some of those companies play into this concept? I mean, in my simple mind, I see those as favorable indications toward change, because at the very least, there's a more direct line to patients. Do you agree, or do you see anything problematic there? Or
no, I totally agree. I think it's absolutely a really, really important step here. It's a step towards changing the paradigm. Historically, you've always used the drug distributors, and that's how business was done. Mm-hmm. And, going back to what I said, it was just the way why the chicken crossed the road.
Yeah.
This changes that, and I think you're seeing that Lilly's been doing that in terms of some of the GLP drugs that they've got direct to consumer. And, I think some of that also lends itself because some of those things are outside of insurance. I think, what Amazon and Cuban are doing are more directed to generics, but I think it does provide the platform that's going to be necessary to give people alternative ways of distributing drugs. I think the control over the formulary is important because that controls reimbursement. You got to follow the cash, you at the end of the day follow that, which is why I think, if you can make the rebates part of a compliance program, I think you can drive some really good outcomes. But, and cutting out the middleman by what those folks are doing is going to squeeze out wasteful costs. The question is how you can kind of scale that out and make it much more pervasive to really upset and put pressure on the system. Because right now, I think I'd probably call it more of a gnat and a nuance as opposed to something that's going to really change the way we conduct business.
Yeah.
And I think we also need to be mindful that the way care delivery is going on is changing. I don't think it's as much of us selling a pill anymore or selling an injection. We're selling an outcome. When you look at gene editing or gene therapy or any of those, those are almost like we're providing a service. It's not as much of the traditional way we conduct. You look at digital pharma. It's all about engaging the consumer and educating the consumer, and the consumer is playing a much more active role. Let's just look at all the commercials we watch on TV when we're watching a ball game. In terms of informing consumers. So I think we got to extend that and become engaged with them. And I think recognizing healthcare consumerism is here to stay is really important. And the internet and e-health have facilitated this. Biopharma must focus on creating closer relationships with patients as well as the other stakeholders. The step change towards healthcare consumerism necessitates supporting patients on their journey and becoming more engaged and educated in their decision making. I think a lot of times patients are overwhelmed with some of the indications and diseases that they have, and they don't necessarily know where to turn. And I think, other than just selling them a drug, I think you can help them with their patient experience. And I think, it's going to create a lot more loyalty with the consumer.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to drill into that a little bit more on, the biopharma corporate and leadership role and to what degree they can play a hand in affecting change here. But real quick before I go there, one of the things that I've heard you often wax on is the influence of politic on industry during an election year. So I'm curious about whether or not the fact that, like I asked you earlier, why is this a timely conversation to have right now? We are in an election year. We do see quite a bit of jockeying for position and influence in Congress right now around the biopharmaceutical industry, whether it's around pricing and benefits or whether it's around who we do business with of Chinese origin, a la the Biosecure Act, which I don't want to get into right now. We'll save that for another episode. But my point is that we see a lot of this kind of positioning happening right now, and I think that's probably influenced by the fact that it's an election year. What impact do you think this year of politics could, in a positive sense, have on at least starting the ball rolling a little bit toward change?
Well, I'd say what is positive is that, that we had that first bill that got approved in the House to lower costs and in Transparency Act. That was really the first bill that I'm aware of that's been approved by the House to kind of hold PBMs much more accountable and ensure health decisions are made by patients and doctors and not driven by middlemen at the end of the day. That certainly is a formal recognition of the issue. The White House has initiated discussions at the end of February on the topic as well. So it certainly seems to be front and center. So I would hope, given that it's an election year, we can use our vote, our influence, and reach out to our senators and our congressmen to facilitate that for everybody's benefit. By the Bio website actually has a place on their website where if you put in your zip code, they got the form letter and they can really direct it to whoever you need it directed to. So it shouldn't be an investment of too much time, but the impact can be really profound. So I would certainly encourage people to do that. And, to your point, in the election year, people, particularly since they have a target that they both agree on, maybe that's our best protection, is that they're not going to be able to differentiate themselves by beating on us.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the PBMs will bear a bit of that as well as as their profile gets raised as in a more of objective, villainous manner. But, I think it's only going to be natural, that, it's going to put some pressure on the industry. There's going to be talk about for expanding IRA. I think there's also positive things in there that I'm hearing, that they may fix the disconnect between large and small molecules and may make it a little bit easier for orphan drugs. So I think there's been some general acknowledgement that some of that policy has room for improvement. I think so. I think as part of some of the horse trading, I think they made that there's some positive in that sense. But I do think, we're going to be a punching bag because that's what politicians do. I think a lot, in my view, it's going to be more noise and balk than bite.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that's obviously to be determined.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get back to the biopharma and biotech industry role. I mean, it's an interesting time also looking at biotech, crop of young up and comers. The industry's bouncing back. It might not be a rapid bounce, but it's a bounce nonetheless. And a lot of the biotech execs that I spend time talking with are, a generation or two removed from you and I, Alan. They grew up in a in sort of a, push the boundaries and explore new avenues kind of a world, and that's good. Like I think it's good as we look forward to making change happen at the drug distribution level. But the question would be like, what role can the industry leaders play? I had an interesting conversation just recently with a guy, totally unrelated topic, but I was talking with a guy, Paul Preeb, who's working with me on a project for a single use bioprocess manufacturing single use event, right? So totally unrelated to what we're talking about right now. But we started talking about standards, and he said something that really resonated. He said in his capacity, he hears from a lot of biopharma execs and leaders and SMEs who constantly refer to standards bodies as they and what they need to do. And they need they need to do this and they need to do that. They need to affect this and that. And Paul's response was, they is us. Like they is us. Like if you want standards or systems or operations to change, you can't just sit there and say they. You got to get involved. So to what degree can industry leadership, individuals, people who have opinions and want to see benefit to patients, to want to see benefit to their drug distribution models, even before they exist, what can they do? What can they be doing right now?
I think we need to kind of row in the same direction. But I think in terms of that, I like the woodpecker has always been very effective. You just got to keep pecking in that regard. But I think, changing the way we distribute drugs is something that we should all think about. We don't have to cross the road like the chicken. There are other ways. I think what Amazon and Cuban are doing, speak to that. Mm-hmm. Direct to consumer approaches are going to become a possibility. So, I think it's something to think about. I think, you don't want to necessarily be do mercenary selling. Mercenaries get a lot of arrows in their back.
Yeah.
But I think it's something for all of us to continue to think about. I would say that fundamentally, though, that, it's really important for us to focus on, perhaps statements of the obvious, but first things first. You need to focus on developing differentiated and impactful products. And it's critical to really understand what your target product profile is. Otherwise, it's akin to getting into a car without a destination. You're never going to get there. And in addition to establishing clinical value, which I think people always focus on, you need to really understand, how's that going to be differentiated at the end of the day from the standard of care and the competitive products that are out there. And one area that I think people really, really overlook, gloss over, I think it's becoming more. But I think, again, I think it's worth taking a survey and seeing where it falls. And that is focusing on the pharmacoeconomics of a product and really be able to demonstrate the economic value. And ideally, that should really be built into, your clinical studies as appropriate. You should be able to remeasure, I think I touched on it, rehospitalization, additional procedures, and factor in what are you saving the system. Again, I think the emphasis should be on outcomes and system savings. We as a nation, have the highest cost per capita on healthcare spend, and we have the lowest life expectancy in the Western world. Go figure. We're actually spending more for less. That's not good.
For sure, it's not. In the meantime, like in the reality that we're in right now, and that's all great advice. I mean, having a thorough understanding of the economic impact of your therapy gives you, I think, empowerment to have a say, at least in the way that these things are distributed and who gets paid for them. if you were going to give some advice to someone who's on the precipice, who's about to launch a new therapy in the current paradigm, is there anything that you can suggest to them as to how they navigate in the reality that we're in right now, right? Like, it's one thing to affect big change, and these are great ideas. I mean, it's great to talk about them, but in the paradigm that we're in right now, is there anything that they can do to affect a better outcome despite the the money grab?
I think you just got to, I think it's really blocking and tackling. I don't think you can really swim against the tide here. I think you just understand what you're up against. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really, again, coming back to being able to position your drug, understand who are the right patients for your drug, make sure that, that they understand the drug, that they comply and continue taking the drug, making sure, again, whether or not there's pre-authorization. There's a lot of hoops to get involved with this. So, I think an interesting statistic is how many scripts actually get converted and get fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And there's a big gap there. So, that's money that's falling on the ground, and patients that are not being helped. So I think there's things that you want to look at in terms of ensuring your commercial execution. There's a reason why many drug launches for companies get shorted by the investors on Wall Street. And that's because they don't necessarily execute so well. So the expectations around the drug launch are generally disconnected from what the ultimate reality is. And that inefficiency provides an arbitrage opportunity for investors. Yeah. So, learning, I would certainly go to school and look at recent drug launches and look at the ones that have worked and look at the ones that haven't worked. Understand why in both cases and incorporate those lessons and learnings into your plan of action. Yeah. Very good. What have I not asked you or not allowed you the time to elaborate on in terms of this this topic and the ideas around affecting change? I think I would just kind of reinforce what we've said, because I think we've covered this pretty well at a high level. Mm-hmm. And I would just say that, the combination of exposing and reforming PBMs and championing biopharma consumerism would really be a great start to rehabilitating the biopharma bad boy image that we have right now. And I think there's a huge opportunity. The bar is very low. The bar is very low. The bar is very low. Yes. Yeah, well, good stuff, Allan. I appreciate the conversation. And I mean, do you, when you tackle a topic like this on the podcast, where the concept is big, and the momentum that it would take to create change is like difficult to fathom. I mean, are you comfortable? Are you comfortable? Or are you like, somebody's got to talk about this stuff? No, absolutely. I mean, I'd be happy to talk about the U.S. budget deficit. That doesn't seem to be getting a lot of airtime either. We'll save that for another podcast series. Well, and I appreciate it. It's excellent thought. And just to reiterate the point that you made, I think there is a role for virtual everyone in the space to play here. Go to bio, figure out who your representative is if you haven't done it yet, and become a champion for the cause. I mean, I talk to all of you, and patient outcomes comes up in every single conversation. And if patient outcomes are important, then this is important. So there you go. Take action. It's not them, it's us. We got to row in the same direction. Yeah. Allan, thanks for the time. I always appreciate it. And it's always a great conversation. Always a pleasure, and to be continued. Thanks again. So that's Allan Shaw. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Life Science Connect.
and available to hear anywhere you listen to podcasts, and now available to watch at bioprocessonline.com under the Listen and Watch tab. Subscribe to our newsletter at bioprocessonline.com/BOB. And in the meantime, thanks for listening.